everybody, we are the Sustainability Sisters, and today we are going to react to certain videos about the COP29. Let's go.
Awesome. So, as we all know, COP29 just happened and in Azerbaijan, Baku, and the results have not been so great, especially for India. There have been reactions pouring in and news from all the directions. So, we've decided to make a quick summary of
India, you have the floor.
This has been an unfortunate incident, and it is in continuation of several such unfortunate incidents that we have seen of in not following inclusivity, not respecting the positions of countries. We had informed the presidency, we had informed the secretariat that we wanted to make a statement prior to any decision on the adoption. However, and this is for everyone to see, this has been stage managed, and we are extremely, extremely disappointed with this incident.
So, for context, she is Chandni Raina and she is speaking on behalf of India. So, at this COP, what happened is through a series of internal and external negotiations and planning, the developing nations they decided on this figure of 1.3 trillion, as we all know, to be having to transition, and they needed this funding in climate finance from the developed nations. And here we can also talk about the climate justice, which is that since the developed nations have already used the resources, oil, coal, they are ahead of developing nations, and also they have emitted their share of carbon dioxide, and developing nations still have that budget for them. So that's how we had this Kyoto Protocol and everything to enable developing nations to drive their decarbonization. So here, developing nations had this draft document ready for requesting 1.3 trillion, and which was not discussed till the last 3 days. And so they didn't discuss, they didn't mention, they didn't negotiate this figure, and so that's why she's saying that they have not uh, actually accepted our documents and there have been no negotiations. The negotiations only started in the last 3 days, and which gave a very little time for developing nations also to negotiate more on the behalf of everyone. Also, I heard there were like this kind of strategies also, that they wanted a division kind of division between the developing nations, and they were promising some good incentives to some of the nations so that they divide. And but a very good thing happened, that the G77 in China, they were very adamant on this 1.3 trillion figure as a whole, so they didn't get divided up between themselves. So although this COP was almost a failure in terms of getting the climate finance, but it is seen that the developing nations, they understand how pressing issue this is and how they have to stand together and all of that. So that was
There's this thing in US politics, it's called filibustering. So they just keep talking and talking and talking till the time limit for the bill to be put down as an act is over. So you just keep talking. You keep talking about the same points. You scream, you shout, you just get rid of the time you have on hand to not reach to the negotiation where everybody wanted to go.
Exactly.
So let's continue.
Was one of the most stronger pushbacks that we have seen by any country in the recent COPs. So kudos for India to standing up. And I believe India was also supported by other countries like the Nigeria, Malawi, and Bolivia. And the larger point is actually twofold. First of it is the point of inequitable financing, right? The number that we are looking at, which is of 300, instead of it being instead of most of the amount coming from grants, it's actually coming from loans. And that loans are actually extended to developing countries, which, as we know, have not been the historical emitters.
Or the
So,
ones who can pay back for that matter.
exactly. So, I think India standing up for this was, at least for me as an Indian, was like a proud moment.
Yes, and we can do that because our per capita emissions are very low and we are ramping up our renewable energy. So we are in a very good position given that we also receive the aid. We can possibly drive a lot of climate change adaptation and mitigation. And I'm just shocked, like after so much discussions, the developing nations, they come up with a figure and they have all the backings and they don't even want to negotiate. They just want to drive their, okay, this is what can happen. And not only that the figure is lower, the other things in the regulation are also diluted. For example, now the funding is not from developed nations to developing nations. It's not obligation, it's rather like a voluntary fund.
Volunteering system, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's not like it is coming from developed nation. It has to be it's a voluntary thing, so India can also like fund in it.
They're pushing for any private and public support at this point. And ठीक है, मतलब, when you have the money to do it and you don't support an initiative, I want them to feel a sense of which side of history they want to be on, the one that say rejects climate change and does nothing about it, or and they just have a lot of money to do what? To adapt after a disaster, adapt after everything has gone down. Mitigation is like 3x cheaper, 300x cheaper, honestly, if you look at it.
Yeah, I think this would be a moment in history, the history where we will say that yes, India took a stand and they took a stand, but it was the developed nations which did not come for backing the climate change or the developing countries. So yeah, it's not a legal obligation as of now. It's just voluntary contribution from the developed countries.
For all action. And this incident is indicative of a lack of trust, a lack of collaboration on an issue which is a global challenge which is faced by all of us and most of all by the developing countries that are not responsible for it. But we've seen what you have done. However, would want to say that gaveling and trying to ignore parties from speaking does not behove the UNFCCC system, and we would want you to hear us and also hear our objections to this adoption. We absolutely object to this unfair means followed for adoption.
Which is upset. But then my thing is, this fund is coming in 2035, right? What happens to the world till 2035? I mean, what is the contingency?
So it's like they are going to accelerate it to at least 1.3 trillion by 2035. But by then, it is annual public provision of dollar 300 billion. So it is there. It's not coming on 2035. At least that's what I understand.
From the mitigation perspective on this finance deal, they mentioned that most of the money that will come in is going to go into oil and gas by exploration, ki jagah solar and wind, and this energy transition and on climatological disasters, right? So what about the others? I mean, we are coming to a multi-disaster age, and we're still talking about like a couple of things only, even at COPs.
Yeah, so
Dude.
there are other funds like loss and damage funds,
Hmm.
which is other than this one. That is what I assume. That is after the disaster has stuck. This is for the mobilizing climate finance, for example, for the activities like climate change mitigation, adaptation. So someone can go that and then they can propose that this big project is aligned to it's aligned to take the finance for climate change mitigation, and they can procure money from this fund. But this is again like a loan, so it's up to them to give it or not, whether it checks all of their boxes. I think that.
We already have successful examples of such collective financing being in place, and which is currently actually implemented right now. And I think one of the examples for them that is the oil spill fund, right? Where any barrel of oil that gets imported, there is some 5 cent, if I'm not wrong, charged to each barrel that gets collected in each fund, in a cumulative fund. And if there is a oil spillage incident, that money gets diverted to mitigate the risk of such incidences. It's not that we don't have such examples in place, it's just a matter of functioning. Here the financing is set in a manner where it seamlessly gets collected, and here the problem is with the differentiating responsibilities that, and the negotiations which were not transparent, which created this sort of situation where it was rushed, it was not transparent, it did not give each parties enough time or space to speak their mind, and of course the classic principal agent issue that we have. That is the main problem when it comes to climate finances. The countries who essentially will be funding it are not the countries that would be benefiting from it per se, removing the historical emission context aside from a purely financial perspective. And that is what becomes one of the biggest hindrances when it comes to collecting money for this. Because, say, a developing country putting a lot of funds into a fund, but when the money gets deployed, it's not them that are benefiting for it. And when the trend of the world right now is every country is becoming more protectionist rather than globalized. So even that creates a sense of resistance of, we got to look inwards, protect ourselves, rather than putting out money for, say, something which would not benefit us in the short term. But again, that's a very near-sighted view of everything. Because
Right.
after a point, everything is going to impact you. It's a full circle. It's gonna come to you. So if you're going to have such short-sighted view, which may make financial sense right now, but there are larger costs, which are externalities, which are beyond your control. What about that? But yeah, that's how it is currently.
And I think they already know they are also in midst of climate crisis. Maybe they are not accepting it, but there are wildfires in US, parts of Australia, Europe. So it's not like they don't know. They know and they choose to ignore. I think that is.
Exactly.
And
And
the best part was China kept mum on this matter because it's currently one of the major emitters. So, I mean, pick a side, okay? But don't stay mum, please.
We are faced with one of the biggest challenges of all times, which will determine our existence. The only thing that enables us to move beyond and undertake action in line with addressing this challenge is collaboration and trust among us. It's a fact that both have not worked today. And we are extremely hurt by this action of the presidency and the secretariat. Developed countries have the wherewithals to take action. They should agree to advance their net zero objectives, the goals, and become net negative soon thereafter. But there is also trust that financial resources, technology, and capacity building, the means of implementation, the essence of any climate action is required, and that is required by the developing countries. This will enable those who want to take the action and who want to survive in this changing climate world, but are not able to do it because they need the support of the developed countries, and we seek trust in that. And I'm sorry that we need to make concerted efforts to do this, because clearly what's happened today is not any indication of this.
Shade.
Trust that.
So it seems the 250 billion figure, it's just for the LDs, low developing countries,
Yeah.
and then there are other countries which are prone to sea level rise and flooding. So they themselves, just for them only, they seeked 250 billion. So they in fact asked to also include 600 billion is what China asked, and then 250 billion on for these countries itself. And the final figure came up to 300 billion. So is this a joke?
Excellent hard bargaining going on with our world's future.
एकदम चिंदी पैसा.
Yeah, I think for adaptation, the amount of money required is huge. For mitigation, for India, I am still like sure, because ours has been a tradition of jugaad. So I think we'll do it somehow. Maybe it is not, it will not be in line with the development and the decarbonization both, but it can come at a cost of development.
Excellency, we have worked together, not for 1, not for 2, but 3 years on this, to have a mandate before us and to implement.
So the NCQG's new collective quantified goal on climate finance. So it was a section in Paris Agreement that before 2025, we also revisit the Paris Agreement, and then we have new goals on finance. So that's why they worked so much. Like for 3 years, they worked on what figure do we want to quote, and then it was wrapped up in just 3 days. So it was not even discussed.
Implement the mandate provided by the COP29 decision, para 53, to set the new collective quantified goal. The goal was envisioned and decided to be set in the context of the needs and the priorities of developing countries, and based on the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibility. Both are fundamental to the UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. This is the essence of our collaboration. This is the only basis for coming to a UN body where all of our countries can together discuss and arrive at solutions to address climate challenges that we all face. The global south is being pushed to transit to low carbon pathways, even at the cost of our growth. We have to face the CBAM measures. There are other measures that are being imposed by developed country parties to make the transition really not easy. In fact, it's quite difficult to enable such a transition.
Oh God.
Very competitive, hostile environment that we are facing at the moment.
What if this is like a षड्यंत्र? Now, what she's saying is true, right? CSRD regulations आ गए, carbon credits पे भी वो लोग regulations लाने वाले हैं. We, even as India, even as one of the most forthcoming Southeast Asian countries, we're quite ahead, but we're not that ahead कि हम EU या US या अगर कोई green deal हो भी गया, उसके साथ at par रहे, correct? What if all of these regulations, and I know for a fact that this is a pain for most of the industries, जहाँ पे we've had people coming up to us and saying, what are all of these requirements for reporting that these international guidelines are setting? They should come to India and see how things work here and then set guidelines. Madam, यही तो दिक्कत है, यही तो हम बता रहे हैं कि but what if this whole system is a hindrance for us as developing nations to be able to come up to this? मतलब I get कि time नहीं है, but how would we make things better? Are even regulations helping make things better for that matter?
No, but like she mentioned, CBAM. So
Hmm.
CBAM is about taxing the high carbon goods which are getting exported. So
Yes.
if that happens, then this globalization, like as such, stops. Like we, whatever goods we have, those remains in the country. And then at the end of the day, the GDP is also not a really reflective measure also of
Yeah,
country.
that's always been true.
So, so maybe if once that stops, we come up with something, some other alternative.
So,
And
but where is the benefit in this for the developed nations also? They don't produce
nothing.
most of the iron and steel in the world, right? उनको सब import ही करना पड़ता है. हाँ माना they
Yeah.
produce finished products, but even for that they need to import raw materials from us. If we are taxed, they are also going to be indirectly taxed. हम ऐसे
Right.
थोड़ी दे देंगे सारे
Yeah,
tax.
it will get passed on, of
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
course.
what happened with EVs, no? Like the EVs that are getting manufactured within Europe are more expensive than the ones they are importing from China. But if they come up with CBAM, it will
Mm.
be almost equivalent.
Level playing.
Uh,
But you
and
have to also consider how China, the state backs like this.
How does it become equivalent?
Yeah. The equivalency is not what we're aiming for right now. We're just aiming for some changes. And maybe regulations does push companies towards, we have seen
Yeah.
how companies are if there is no stick on their head to do something from the goodness of their heart. Very rarely. I'm not saying there are no companies, but
Good.
unless there is an authority above their head, they
Mm.
won't even calculate their emissions. Like some simple thing as carbon accounting
Yeah.
won't happen. And these are all bases that we need to have. Once when there is a next global stock take, we'll have a lot more data at that point when we did like back then.
Then
So in a
it's it's also probably about having more verified data. ये data तो आज भी बनता है, correct? You and I receive data on a daily basis. वो
yeah,
देख के लगता है आज ही बना के भेजा है इन्होंने.
right.
no, but we have this thing also, satellite data also
Yeah.
now. So it doesn't have to be verified. We have eyes in the sky. And but the thing is, it's like US now
Mm.
with now new elections and new presidency. Now these people are not taking action, which makes the entire world question themselves that okay, US is not taking action, why should we? Because it's the superpower as of now. It's it's the country that drives the global economy. It is the highest emitter. It is the most amount of money, the maximum amount of warfare. It's the giant. So if they are not taking any action, and then there are rules for developing nations for reducing their carbon emissions and paying taxes on the goods they are exporting, it does not make any sense. Then they might as well say okay, let's not export, let's just keep them in India, their resources. There will be lesser of resource drain, maybe lesser of brain drain, who knows.
Yeah,
I
the
read
dark cloud of Trump election did loom over the COP29 also. Like people were very scared, or the countries were scared to make, strong statements because everybody had that thing in the back of their mind. What if Trump actually pulls out of the Paris Agreement, as he did say last time when he was elected that he's going to, pull US out of the Paris Agreement. So people were very like walking on eggshells on making those comments.
Yeah. Yeah, they said the COP29 number of people were also less. That
Yeah.
was lesser than last COP. So, but we awaited big decisions, and it was quite a drama, and everything, whatever happened, developing nations walked out of this, where it was declared that the funding is going to be 300 billion only. There was a walkout overall, there was a good thing that happened is that developing nations are together in all of this. So, like I said.
The COP21 decision on NCQG was in the light of inequitable impacts of climate change on developing countries, the increasing threat of these impacts, and the need to finance the evolving needs and priorities. We are disappointed with the outcome, which clearly brings out the unwillingness of the developed country parties to fulfill their response. The outcome proposed in the paper will further affect our ability to adapt to climate change, greatly impact our NDC ambitions and its implementation, and create further challenges to our resilience, and above all, will severely impact growth. India does not accept the goal proposal in its present form. Developed countries.
But then what? I mean, you don't accept it, but now what? Now negotiations stop till next year.
Yeah, that is what it is. And it's not like we can ask them that can you please revise now in between. That will also not happen.
मतलब
We have
कितने लोगों का टाइम पास हुआ तुम ये सोचो. All of these people coming in suits and boots to COP29 thinking आज तो कुछ करके जाएंगे and then nothing.
So our time got wasted, no developing nations. So they anyway wanted to
So, but the developed countries also willingly came, wasted everyone's time and went back.
yeah, that's true. They
Net
have
zero ही है हम इस मामले में.
Countries taking lead for a mobilization goal of a mere sum of $300 billion, and that too to be reached only by 2035. That's almost 11 years later.
Exactly.
And that too from a wide variety of sources. So it would have to be private, it would have to be multilateral. And there are large amounts of it which will be left for the developing countries to mobilize themselves. The goal is too little, too distant. It is 2035, it's too far gone. Our 2030 estimates tell us that we need to do it at 1.3 trillion per year till 2030. But we have only been agreeable to have, or we have a proposal that talks about 300 USD billion mobilization goal. It does not address the needs and priorities of developing countries. It is incompatible with the principle of CBDRC and equity. Regardless of our battle with impacts of climate change, it is a fact that developing countries are accused continuously of emissions, forgetting the high per capita emissions.
If the previous goal was to do this by 2030 with $1.3 every year, $3 trillion every year, then that sum would be $7.8 trillion by 2030. ठीक है? तो हम कितना underestimate करके उन्होंने value दिया है यार 2035. Of course they're going to walk out. Yay!
We're not even considering inflation, right? Like 11 years down the line, inflation, the 300 million will be effectively like what, 200?
आज के दिन से 6 साल.
नहीं,
And
it's like
2035
6 years, yeah.
see, it's like 1.3 trillion is been promised.
Hmm.
Now to mobilize it, the promised sum, when it has to be mobilized, means when it comes to market. So, for example, there were finance opportunities this year which could mobilize only like 10 billion of all the 1.3. The promised is 1.3 trillion. Sorry, not
Okay.
300 billion. The promise
Mhm.
requested was 1.3 trillion. But there is a difference between what has been promised and what got mobilized. So mobilize then takes time. Like there has to be channels, the members need to be educated, and then they need to identify all those projects which are like eligible for climate finance. So although they have promised, they are saying that this 300 billion is going to be mobilized by 2035 means it will be at that point that much climate finance will be happening in the market. So it's like that. So which means from this year onwards, like every year, this is the amount which is available for developing countries. But how much they can mobilize is also up
To them.
the us,
पर
them.
बात वही होती है ना,
Yeah.
आप ऐसे पकड़ो कि ऐसे पकड़ो, पकड़ तो आप यही रहे हो.
So, there is a gap also between that is promised and which will actually be mobilized, and there have been no discussions about how this is going to be mobilized. So once if it is not decided how the provision is going to take place and how mobilization is going to take place, of course that 300 billion is also not getting mobilized if there are no measures.
Of the developed countries, forgetting also the historical responsibilities of the developed countries. This only adds to the problem at hand for us, and the proposed goal shall not solve anything for us. In fact, we have to implement ambitious NDCs and economic challenges that we need to navigate and address the adaptation needs. The amount that is proposed to be mobilized is abysmally poor. It's a paltry sum. It is not something that will enable conducive climate action that is necessary for the survival of our country and for the growth of our people, their livelihoods. And I'm sorry to say that we cannot accept it.
Dude, imagine being able to say this to UNFCCC representative. I don't want this. Take it back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think she made it.
Props to her.
It's another thing that how it goes back and whether it gets added to that agreement or not.
But बहन ने दिल हल्का कर लिया. For sure.
I got hurt.
The random girl smiling. She's also with us.
She's like Kalesh.
Excellency, the current texts, paragraphs 8A, 8C, and 9 are highly problematic for us. This little commitment has been further qualified by a footnote. We know that recapitalization of MDBs is a matter that has remained unaddressed. And in that situation, we know also that in times to come, if we participate, developing countries will be and are going to be the major contributors for financing climate action through this 8C. Counting finance mobilization through MDBs into the overall goal is not a progression from 100 billion goal, but is a deflection of the responsibility of the developed countries towards developing country shareholders of the MDBs. Excellency, I regret to say.
So yeah, the MDBs are multilateral development banks, which have fund not only from developed countries, they also have funds from developing nations. So all in all, the 300 billion has money from everyone, not just developed countries. Like
Right.
India is also funding.
They're basically saying, I'm looking at the definition. Recapitalization is a corporate reorganization that involves a company's capital structure may change. The goal is to shift the company's capital structure to reach its optimal capital structure.
Here she said that the finance is going through MDBs, and so there the funds are available from everyone, the developed countries, the
Okay.
developing countries,
So
everyone.
instead of the capital just being given by one party or just through the bank, they're reaching out to different segments. That's the public and private, and recapitalizing the structure where everyone can contribute and then pushing the loans.
Right.
Right.
So she's saying it's
And
diluted.
the problem it creates is that even developing countries' funds are flowing to it when they should be on the receiving end rather than on the end that pays.
Okay.
It actually takes away responsibility from the historical emitters.
Yeah.
Ponzi scheme.
That this document is nothing more than an optical illusion. This, in our opinion, will not address the enormity of the challenge we all face. Therefore, we oppose the adoption of this document. We oppose the adoption of this document. India opposes the adoption of this document, and please take note and regard of what we have just said from the floor of this room. We see
She finished her mukda, like mukda khatam karte last line 3 बार बोलना होता है. So she's like, we oppose this document.
Yes.
We oppose this document for the third time.
herself heard and how. Like, kudos.
we seek a much higher ambition from the developed countries, and which does not seek support. The ambition that exists at present of 300 billion is actually seeking support of the developing countries, and that is such an unacceptable fact. It is not right that you should expect that from a developing country, and the developed countries are happy to say that we should be contributing to that effort. I'm sorry, we are not happy. We are very unhappy, disappointed with the process, and object to the adoption of this agenda. Thank you.
Woo! क्या बात बोली है बहन, क्या बात. Do we see them walking out?
Very nice.
Very well said. Actually, another problem which was not spoken in this specific video with MDP, but the other one was where the funding will be actually, and in the private sector will have to give around 65 billion annually. There's some target which seems a little unrealistic without any significant and solid regulations mandating private sector to mobilize that funds for this. So it's a little whimsical at this point. And if that does not happen, again, the burden goes to the countries and in turn transfers to the developing countries. So yeah, it's a little up in the air. It's whimsical. It's not enough. All in all.
Guys, please follow us and stay tuned, because we are going to be discussing more of what happened at COPs in our upcoming deep dives on climate finance, on carbon credits, and all of those. And let us know in comments what you want to learn.
Hashtag copy Ganesh.
Yes.
Ah,
Okay, and like,
Sure.
subscribe to Sustainability Sisters. We are coming up with amazing videos. And stay tuned.